Hello everybody and welcome to the third day of European Blockchain Week. My name is Tanja Bivic-Plankar from Blockchain Alliance Europe and I will be your moderator for the day. The main topic of the third day of European Blockchain Week is blockchain and AI for European Green Deal. Today, 3 panels are planned: blockchain for frictionless trade, blockchain for and AI for renewable energy, and we are starting with the panel blockchain and AI for circular economy. The circular economy helps to build a positive human future by using technology and intelligent design to maximize resource usage and reduce waste. One part of making a circular economy successful is incentivizing new behaviors, like sustainable resource production and consumption, product repurposing and recycling. Without trust and transparency, we can revert back to linear economy. And blockchain has the potential to build that trust. The moderator of this first panel is Luben Kabakcio from Blockchain for Europe. So Luben, the stage is yours. Please introduce your panelists.
Thank you, Tanja, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel this morning on blockchain and AI for the circular economy. And thank you so much for being with us. I also want to say thank you to the organizers for inviting us and for the great organization of this event. So my name is Luben Kabakciev, and I'm the regulatory officer at Blockchain for Europe. And I'm going to be your moderator today for the panel session and the introductory speeches before that. Today's session, as Tanja mentioned, will focus on how blockchain and AI can help with innovative business models in the circular economy and what some of the challenges may be. As will be showcased by our speakers shortly, this is one of the main building blocks of the European Green Deal. And it will be a very exciting discussion from various perspectives. So today's panel discussion will start off with introductory speeches from Willem Neel, who is coming from the Director General for the Environment of the European Commission. Then we have an introductory speech from Jérôme Petrie, who is coming from the Ministry of the Economy of Luxembourg. Marie Ramon Dard, who is from the French Ministry of Ecology. Matthew Yogur, from the IOTA Foundation, and last but not least, Tomasz Lebek from Origin Trail. After the introductory speeches, we will go into a roundtable discussion starting at 11 o'clock. And without me taking more time, I want to give the floor to our first speaker today, Mr. Willem Neel, who will walk us through some of the European Commission's initiatives and vision for the circular economy. Mr. Neel is an advisor on circular economy at the European Commission's Director General, as already mentioned. He has previously served for 11 years as member of cabinet for 2 European commissioners, where he advised on policies on circular economy, among others. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to William. William, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luben, and good morning to everybody. I'm looking forward to the day. I wish I was in Slovenia. I love Slovenia a lot, but unfortunately I can't be with you. As Luben said, I've been involved in environment policy for quite a while as an advisor on circular economy, and it's maybe 2 or 3 years that we've been really talking within the Commission between the DG Connect with the people involved in digital policy and data and the Environment Directorate General. And I've been very much at the core of that. And it's been really important to try and get some very basic understanding about language, about concepts, and so on, because it's really 2 worlds apart. And I think many of my colleagues in the environment policy world shut off and really don't understand when people start talking about the various digital technologies. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, misconceptions in the world of data and digital policy about environment. So let me just start off with a few basic misconceptions which I need to pop, and I hope that you have my slides there that everybody can see. The first thing I wanted to say is that it is not just about recycling. If you imagine all of the materials going through the European economy like a river, the amount that we recycle is actually quite small, and we should improve it. But what really matters is to try to slow down that flow. We need, if you can imagine, you've got materials coming in either domestically, a lot of heavy materials, building materials and biomass and so on coming from Europe, a lot of critical raw materials and expensive metals and so on coming from abroad. All of those things are embodied in products and assets and buildings and so on. And what is the most important thing is for us to slow down that flow. It's not necessarily the recycling at the end to bring stuff back into the beginning. It's really to make that river a bit more like a lake, so that we're constantly getting the well-being that those buildings and products and so on provide us. And when you consider that about 50% of greenhouse gas emissions and about 90% of biodiversity loss comes at the extraction processing stages, then you can see that if we can use less of those materials, obviously less virgin materials, so we want to recycle more, but if we can get more out of them whilst they're in the economy, that is really what matters. That's what's going to make the difference. So what we really need to work on is to try to cut out some of the single-use and short-lived products to increase the durability of those products, and to increase the efficiency. And we need to use stuff more intensively. So, for example, cars are parked 95% of the time, which is a massive waste. And when they are being driven, it's usually just one person in them. Same goes for empty space. So we need to use things more intensively, and we need to make them last longer. Next thing is to look at the business opportunities that come from that. And I'm not sure if you're seeing my slides here, but I guess many of you know the butterfly diagram of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So you have a series of feedback loops, which are all about keeping products in use and intensifying the use of those assets. And on the one side, you've got the bioeconomy, on one side, you've got the technical economy. And really the business models and the business potential come from those feedback loops of keeping that value in the system. So whether it's in remanufacturing, refurbishing, maintenance and servicing, sharing models, these kinds of things, which are really circular business models which keep that value in. But it's not easy being a circular business in a linear world, in linear value chains, linear markets, linear financing setups, and so on. So what we're really trying to do at the European level is create a policy framework for that to happen, for those feedback loops to work better. So in our circular economy action plan, which is my next slide, you'll see that we have a focus. This is a circular economy action plan which we adopted just last year. What we've tried to do is take a very systemic approach. So we're looking at key product value chains. And we did this, first of all, in our first circular economy plan from 2015 to 2020, where we looked at the plastics, the whole plastic system in our plastic strategy. And this was a real game changer. I mean, environment policy has been very much based on legislation to punish polluters. This was really looking systemically at a whole value chain, looking at supply and demand, looking at all the different actors and stakeholders in those supply chains, and bringing in a whole range of policies, legislation. So, for example, we banned some single-use plastics, providing incentives and funding, bringing in the private sector, doing things like pledging to use recycled plastics and so on in products. And that was a game changer. So we decided to do that again. And in the new Circular Economy Action Plan, we are, well, actually already this year, we will publish strategies on circular electronics and on textiles. And then we have them in the pipeline for construction and buildings, and for packaging and plastics again. So we're looking systemically. But I think that what is even more groundbreaking in the new Circular Economy Action Plan is a focus on products. Now, I think this is a real first in environment policy. We've had decades of progress in fighting pollution and environmental damage, as I say, through fining and through the courts. And then we've developed these systemic views. But today we're looking at harnessing the single market, which is really one of the great areas of EU level competence. We have a market which is the collective consumption of 500 million consumers. And what we can do through our single market tools is ensure that badly designed products are kept off those markets. We can really keep off the worst. So if we consider the products that are coming onto European markets, so much of the value of those products is lost once they go into recycling. What we really have to try and do is avoid those products, as I said, in the sort of macro sense. At this product level sense, we have to avoid those products becoming waste for as long as possible. We have to, through making sure that they're durable, that they're designed well, that they're repairable, that they can be maintained and serviced and remanufactured. And then, of course, when they do eventually give up the ghost, we need to make sure that they can be recycled. But that is particularly important for the products whose biggest impact is in their production phase. So if you take something like a smartphone, about 80% of the impact of a smartphone is already before you take it out of its packaging. When it's being used, it has a relatively low impact, but 80% of that impact is really coming through the extraction, processing, production, distribution phases. So we need to make sure that we keep them in use for longer, and that when we finish with them, they get a second life. I think about 60% of smartphones that are replaced are still working. So we need to make sure that that works again. Now, I guess you're saying here that you can already start seeing some of the potential applications of blockchain and AI, and I'll come on to that. So what we're trying to do in the Sustainable Products Initiative, which the Commission will adopt in the coming months, is take the Eco-Design Directive, which basically sets minimum design criteria for products going on the European market, expand the scope to cover all products, not only energy using products, so everything from clothes to furniture, etc. And then set sustainability criteria for those products, and look through an ongoing process at individual product groups, and apply particular sustainability criteria to those product groups. And our intention is really to make sustainable products the norm on European markets. And again, I think you can probably start to see where blockchain and AI could come in here. I said that circular economy is about value retention, and so much of that value, the value of any product now, is encapsulated in the data that product generates. So, for example, a recycler needs to know about the hazardous and valuable substances that there are in a product when it comes to the recycler's gates. A repairer or a service provider needs to know the technical specifications and the spare part supplies, or to be able to do predictive maintenance. Somebody buying a second-hand product needs to know the history of that product and its performance to give a good idea of its value. And that whole marketplace needs to be as friction-free as possible and to work as efficiently as possible. And also some of the new business models, things like asset sharing schemes, they need to keep track of the products, and they need to be able to charge according to use of the product and so on. So next slide, please. One part of that, and the next slide, one part of that Sustainable Products Initiative will be addressing data and how we can attach data to those products. So next slide, please. And what we're proposing is a digital product passport, to ensure that the important data will travel with a product through its journey through the economy. I won't go into a lot of detail on this now because Jérôme Petry is going to speak after me, and he will be able to explain how it really works in practice, because in Luxembourg they're actually doing this. But just to say, basically what we're envisaging is that a product passport would be a unique identifier attached to each product, and then a series of obligations to provide data and make that data accessible via the identifier. So this would be working on a distributed system, but with an interface for the data, which would be in the European Green Deal data space. So you would have the possibility of bringing in data from other sources, such as we have data on chemicals from our chemicals agency and so on. And I have to say, I don't actually worry too much about the technological feasibility of the digital product passport. I think that the real challenge will be in establishing a governance system to ensure that we identify, we agree on, and if necessary, we arbitrate on what data is made available to who and at what point, and to ensure that there are equitable conditions for participation, to ensure that that we have quality and validation of data, and particularly the data which is coming from non-EU suppliers. And of course, we will have a lot of issues relating to responsibility and liability. So for me, the technology is there. It'll be a mix of technologies. Our big role at European level as convener is as convener to bring the stakeholders together in each of those product groups to really identify what data needs to be made available by who and when. So next slide, please. And we are aware that there are many cases going on. Jérôme will speak about one of those in a moment. There's the Global Batteries Alliance working on electric vehicle batteries. There are many pilots at product group level, private sector ones, or ones like the one in Luxembourg that we're about to hear about. We're now going ahead with our impact assessment. We've been reassured by all of the public consultations that we've done that this is possible and it's wanted and it would be useful. But as I've said, there are many challenges that will be coming along down the line. But I really hope that we can harness those single market powers that we have to develop the processes and the standards to make it work and to scale it up and have it in a very harmonized and open way. With the aim that we can extract that extra utility and value out of the products and assets as they're going through our economies, and that we can create those business opportunities and slow down that river that I was talking about, the river of materials which is running through our economy. So I'm no great expert on blockchain, but I think that the ability of blockchain to enable any type of digital or digitized asset to be recorded and certified and tracked between parties means that it would be a very effective way to bring together the data that we need for circularity in those complex value chains, and to enable the sort of seamless and frictionless transactions between the very wide and distributed range of actors that we have in those value chains. So I haven't touched here on many of the other ways in which digital technologies can deliver circularity. We can use digital technologies, including blockchain, for better implementation of policy, better compliance control, better waste management. And I think in all areas, we will have a mix of many different technologies, IoT, 3D printing, all kinds of things. But I think just one message to leave you with, and then I'll finish up, is that it's important to remember that all of these technologies can be applied just as easily to unsustainable and linear production and consumption systems, and to accelerating negative impacts as they can to harnessing good and trying to create those circular models. So our job really is to make sure that we get the criteria right, to get it working right, to make sure that we're making a positive contribution with those technologies, not a negative one. I'll leave it there and be very happy to answer any questions in the panel. Thank you.
So I would like to now give the floor to Marie Ramondard, who will present the work of the French Green Deal Working Group at Gaiax. Ms. Ramondard is a project manager for design and innovation at the French Ministry of Ecology. So Marie, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marie Ramondare, Design and Innovation Project Manager for the Innovation Lab of the French Ministry of Ecology. And as part of my mission for the ministry, I'm co-leading the Green Deal work package with Gérard Guinamant from NG. We will participate to the roundtable today. So thank you for the invite. I'm very glad to be part of this event today. And let's start. So today, when talking about challenges such as circular economy or digital solutions and services, we often mention Gaiax. So the first question will be, what's Gaiax? So I won't talk right now about the Green Deal working group, but I would like to say a few things about Gaiax. So what we can say is that originally Gaiax is a Franco-German initiative, which started in January 2019 with 22 companies and organizations. And today there is more than 300 members from all over the world. So among these members, we have companies. So companies that can be users, but also providers of data infrastructure. We also have IT startups. We have research and public institutions or associations. So what is really Gaiax? So Gaiax aims to become a federated and secure data infrastructure by creating an ecosystem in which data is made available and can be shared in a trustworthy environment. So in a nutshell, I would say that Gaiax is not a cloud solution itself, but it's more of a federated system that links many cloud services providers and users together. So just a few words about how it works. So basically the ecosystem consists of 3 layers. So you have the first one, which is the data ecosystem. This one is about networking spaces based on the grid rules in order to share data and service offerings, even across industry sectors. And when I'm talking about services, I think about artificial intelligence, the IoT, but also the big data applications. Then we have the infrastructure ecosystem. This one allows the offerings from different providers to be interconnected. And then we have the Gaiax federated services. And all these different layers are based on common rules that we call the policy rules and the guidelines, such as the architecture standards. And all these rules and standards guidelines constitute the basis of the system that companies that want to join the initiative, we have to respect. So with the next slide. So here on the slide, I don't know if you can see my screen, but I will describe what you should see. So first of all, to understand the challenges that our group, so the Green Deal group, addresses, it's essential for me to mention the fact that the European Commission commitment is to tackle climate and environmental related challenges. And so is the Green Deal working group. So our group enables to rethink the policies. And as you can guess, the scope of the Green Deal group is really broad as it concerns all sectors of economy and can take various forms such as, for example, supporting innovation in industry, also improving the energy efficiency of buildings, or investing in environmentally friendly technologies, and so on. So finally, of course, the Green Deal working group has to fit within the national hubs and the Gaiax vision of developing a trusted European cloud market, respectful of the European Union's common values. So next, I would like to talk about the methodology of the group to achieve the ambition of the Green Deal working group. So the methodology and the timeline is composed of 2 different phases. So we have the first one, which is more of the think phase, and the second one, which is a do phase that we just started in September. So during the first phase, so the think phase, that started in March 2020 and ended in June. So during these 3 or 4 months, what has been really important for us was to have a user-centric approach. So to do so, the working group has brought together the participants. So by participants, I mean private, but also public actors, including public entities of the Ministry of Ecology, in a collaborative process to meet the needs of these enterprises and public administrations that are using cloud solutions and services. So basically, the goal of the collaborative sessions we organized throughout this month was to first identify, but then analyze and evaluate use cases regarding the use of data and cloud solutions. For the second phase, I would say that in the coming months, the working group's work will focus on a solution-oriented phase to work collaboratively on the implementation of the use cases that have been identified during the first phase. To finish on this methodology part, I would say that what was really important is the fact that during the second phase, the reflection will be shared with the participants of the related French working group, such as, for example, automobile, health, energy, and so on, but also at the European level with the data spaces addressing the European Green Deal issues. And for example, we started working with the circular economy working group in Germany and Slovenia. So I don't know if you can see my screen, but on this slide, I would like to present the 10 topics that have been identified as being part of this Green Deal group. So we have, for example, green computing, sustainable city, agriculture, health environment, biodiversity and ecosystem, energy, circular economy. So yeah, so we have 10 themes, as you can see, and as I say, the scope of our group is really broad. And in addition to these themes, we can see on the slide the number of use cases that have been identified by the participants during the workshop sessions. Next, I would like to present the list of the use cases that have been prioritized by the users during the working sessions. So these are not all the use cases that we identified, but these are the prioritized ones. So we have some about the green computing. Actually, we had a lot of use cases about green computing, about developing a common knowledge and labels about the impact of digital solutions. And for example, developing a label for cloud providers. We had some about reducing the environmental impact of digital products at the design stage. We had also use cases about energy, about transports and mobility. And we had one about circular economy that I will develop just after that. But I would say that we only have one so far about circular economy. But we might have more in the next few weeks as we will continue working on these use cases. So for example, for this use case about circular economy, we started with the pain points, which is that there is a lack of available and shared data on the life cycle of products, especially once they enter the recycling processes. So one of the solutions we imagine could be to improve product recycling measurements, for example, by taking into account the origin of recycled products, knowing the real capacity to recycle, and the level of loss in the process, as well as the environmental cost of recycling processes. So basically, the solution will be to define a more performance measurement tool for recycling capacity of products. So what has been really important for the participants, especially for this use case, was to consider the entire life cycle of products. I cannot say more about the use case as we just started the do phase. But as you can see, this is really linked to what William presented just earlier. And the next step will be to define more precisely what data are available today for this topic and what data are not. And so that we need to share more data or collect new data for this use case. Before concluding, I would like to add something about this use case that is really important, is the shared interest between the different working groups, French working groups, but also at the European level, the shared interest with other data spaces such as automobile, cities and mobility. And of course, we also had smart manufacturing or Industry 4.0 that are part of the data spaces of the European initiative Gaiax. So thank you all for listening to the Green Deal working group presentation today. If you have any question, you can just write in the chat, or you can contact us at the email address on the slide, or I can write the email address in the chats if you cannot see my screen. I just would like to add something about Gaiax and this initiative, and what's really important is that we cannot work alone as European countries. We really have to share the different initiatives. We have to create a dynamic, a synergy between the different countries in order to define together our vision of common European data spaces. That's really important. Thank you all. Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you, Marie. That was a great presentation. I would just now like to give a few minutes to Jerome to come back to his presentation. So Jerome, if you could try to sum up your presentation in 4 to 5 minutes, it would be great. The team here is going to broadcast your presentation right now.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ruben, for giving me the word right now. And also thank you, William, for mentioning our initiative around several times. So today I will present you a little bit about the product circularity data sheet and the initiative here in Luxembourg, and also some aspects around blockchain and AI, how it can help on the project. So my name is Jérôme Petry. I work at the Ministry of the Economy in Luxembourg, and I will present today the product circularity datasheet project, which is being supported by the Ministry of the Economy since now 2018. So further back, how this all started in 2018, we made a further analysis to check what kind of circular properties were available on products. And as William correctly mentioned, this is really key to enable a circular economy and an afterlife for the products, to be able for them to flow into new circular business models afterwards. And we came to the conclusion that it was to collect that kind of information, and that typically there's not a lot of information available for the end customer on the product. And today, how is it working? Typically, it's the OEM or the producer or distributor of the product who is trying to go the supply chain backwards and try to fetch all the information people are asking. And what you want to do with the PSTES is really to enable this data to flow throughout the value chain, starting from the bottom of the value chain, and really create a bottom-up system where you can share that kind of information. I will explain you how we want to tackle all this issue. Next slide, please. So we saw that we need for that to establish an international industry standard which will enable us to communicate necessary circular data on products throughout the value chain. And with that, we believe that we will save significant costs to the suppliers and the manufacturers of products by providing that standardized approach. We hope that with that kind of solution, we will support the design of circular products and also enable the implementation of cost-effective circular business models. Today, we have more than 50 international companies working in that co-creation process to create the PCDS and also test it. And as I mentioned before, it has started in 2018, and we are now at the end of phase 2, where we want to kickstart an independent non-profit governance to make the PCDS live on and really increase its membership and awareness on an international base. And we are also kicking off the work at ISO level, so we are active on the working group 5 of TC323 on circular economy. Next slide, please. So the solution we are suggesting is in fact a data template, which is based on a statement approach. So it has 5 different sections where we ask specific information about the product, the producer, the site, and then going through composition details and then different elements to summarize the circular properties based on different possible circular business models. And we are asking this question in a way that you have to reply by true and false. And to make sure that the statements are well understood, together with that, we provide what we call the guidance document, which will be later on the de facto standard and then move into an international standard. And with that, people have the same understanding and can clearly answer to the statement by true and false. By answering by true, you have the burden of keeping evidence of that statement at your own premise. So by this system, we are creating a decentralized system of, and also not storing the data centrally, but really all producers have the responsibility to save that information at their premise. And thus, we also want to make that data available for third-party verification. So that is being enabled also by the standard in parallel and by the data being kept at the producer. So with that, we are really lifting the highest showstopper, which is that people don't want to share confidential information. Here, in this case, you are not sharing the information. You're just saying that your product is complying to that statement, and you keep that information in case there's a need to exchange it with a specific either producer or customer or next user or someone who wants to put a product in a new life cycle. And then, of course, also share it if necessary with the auditors, who then can make their report and validate your assertion. Next slide, please. So the next slide should show 2 different elements. Yes, thank you. So on the left side, I will maybe not go into too much details here, but that's the audit system, how we see it. We see different levels. Important to mention here is that we envisage different levels with different engagements to make sure that it is also inclusive for SMEs and companies throughout the world, and to keep the financial burden of making that third-party audits, if necessary, as low as possible. The more important thing is here on the right side is the IT infrastructure. So we want this to be accompanied by a data exchange platform where we will have a central repository of all the PCDSs. You can look up who has put down a PCDS and what are the statements. And then if you need that specific evidence or information behind the statement, then the data exchange platform will allow you to make that kind of request. And we will make sure that it's a trustful request and provide a secure communication channel between the producer and the one who is requesting that information. We want this to be really also able to be a machine-to-machine exchange system, and that exchange protocol is standardized. So with that, we believe that the system can be easily scaled up and handle a big amount of data. Next slide, please. Yes, so to keep it short, and what already William mentioned is that the PCDS system could be a very interesting way of feeding a lot of information in a digital product passport. So we don't see ourselves as a digital product passport per se, because a lot of information are not disclosed. But the statement approach can be a very helpful way of providing a lot of information into such system. Also, we are, and that's more on the blockchain side, we are looking on how to handle that information, and also how to validate the audit certificates and the proofs put forward for the audit. And there we're working on a notarization proof of concept together with the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure and together with the European Code of Auditors, who is in charge of that very specific use case. And the PCDS could use that specific use case to notarize all the different proofs and make sure that these proofs are really trustful, as well as the audit certificates which will be issued afterwards. We're working with different platforms. I will not go into the details, but just to mention here, Cradle to Cradle 4.0, also the building reporting system like Madasta. Yeah, we see also great support from circular economy leaders throughout the world. Next slide, please. So just to finish my speech, and people can get back to me on that more specifically. I will not go into full details, but as I mentioned, we kicked off the work at ISO level on the working group 5 of TC323. You see here the timeline and the product security data sheet. ISO international standard should be ready to be published in 2024. So still a few years to go ahead, but we see the necessity to have these international companies working together with us to find consensus on what that standard should look like to make it a big success. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome, for making it despite the technical difficulties. So now I would like to turn to Mr. Matthew Yogur, who is the head of smart mobility at the IOTA Foundation. Matthew, the floor is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Matthew Yogur. I am the head of smart mobility at the IOTA Foundation. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about circular economy and the need for trust, and where a protocol really comes to underlie how we do that at scale. This includes, of course, aspects like blockchain and AI. We've seen a lot of commonality today in the different core requirements around infrastructure and data. And so I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about that. There is no presentation, so I'm just going to be speaking through some of these points to discuss and give some insights into how it operates. So the current linear economic cycle revolves around take, make, use, and dispose. That's the traditional economic cycle that we've seen at scale. That's the cycle that we're trying to disrupt with the circular economy. The circular economy takes that and transitions it. And in order to design the waste out by going through the traditional mantra that we're all used to, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. So there's some key products and materials that need to be used, and we need to keep them out of the landfills in order to do that. Reduce, reuse, and recycle go into effect to help limit the number of products we're producing, help change the way we design products, and help us reuse the materials that are going into the products. So this requires standardizing materials and industries, and also standardizing packaging designs. It changes the way businesses operate in a lot of ways, because we don't have unique bottles, unique situations like that when it comes to product development. If we want Coca-Cola to be able to interoperate and go into circular economies with Pepsi, they need to have similar product cycles, similar product designs, so that as they go through this reuse and recycling process, they can be reused regardless of the organization or the stakeholders involved. So we have to plan and design products for regenerative end use and for reusability, which changes the way that we operate as a business, changes the business incentives. And then you also see new business logics coming out of this, where a lot of individuals are starting to advocate for not necessarily ownership of a product anymore, but access. So we see that specifically in the mobility sector really starting to take shape when you have things like ride sharing or carpooling, where you only want to use a vehicle when you need it. You don't necessarily want your vehicle to be parked 23 hours out of the day and only used for the hour that you're using it. So it's providing access to things like that. So it's changing the way that we implement business models and operate as organizations. So we have to rethink how we operate and interact as businesses. We also have to rethink how we operate and interact as individuals. This can be paid for in 4 ways, changing these business cycles and the way we operate. There's either product value going up, so charging more for the product to allocate the change that's needed for circular economies. There's either supply chain costs going down, And for supply chain costs to go down, you need things like efficiency increases, more transparency, data sharing, common infrastructure, which we've seen a lot of today. There's also the major impact that governments and regulators can start to provide, which is around policies, subsidies, and incentives. So how do we create new incentive models? How do we use those to change the way that businesses operate? Because as we're all very familiar, to make these big changes, there needs to be ways to offset the cost because they can be very expensive to step out of these traditional business models and step into new business models. Or the thing that nobody really wants to do is reduce their margins, because that of course doesn't operate, especially in the US with free markets. Reducing margins is typically not a good thing to do because they're very focused on shareholder value and things of that nature. But we're seeing a lot of change in how these things are integrated and scaled in the EU. I'm based out of Austin, Texas. Traditional, I've worked for US federal government for a number of years before coming to the IOTA Foundation. So I really learned a lot from everybody here at EU Blockchain Week. I've learned a lot about how European policy operates. I really do believe that we're starting to see a precedent set where new technologies are really starting to create change and impact. And that's something that's really flourishing here with the way that regulatory environments are being built, incentive models are being created, policies and funding structures are being enabled, something we don't see in a global scale. But to really take circular economy and use it to create the impact that needs to be created, we have to be able to scale these things outside of Europe as well, into the US, into Southeast Asia, and into other countries that need it, so that we can reduce the amount of waste we're producing, reuse products at a large scale, and recycle what can be recycled once it's at the end of its life cycle. So what new incentive models can create? How do we enable efficient collaboration? And how can we create trust? This is where blockchain and I really come into play. The way that we like to describe it from the IOTA perspective is the more fragmented an ecosystem is, the more beneficial blockchain can be to its business. The transparency around open and permissionless systems allows organizations and individuals to generate and build trust between each other and with their consumers or their customers. So there is a strong business case there for permissionless innovation and not permission systems. But of course, you need capabilities that can still allow the input into those systems to be limited only by the trusted parties. So we're seeing with things like EBSI, with things like Gaiax, the ability to take things like digital identities, integrate them into products, and allow that to be transferred through the blockchain so that organizations can have a general understanding of what they're all producing, how they're interacting with each other, and inherently trust the business relationships that they're building and interact more openly and collaboratively. This then goes back into the way that we need to pay for these changes, where supply chain cost needs to go down. So by collaborating more efficiently, we start to save on overhead. By using common infrastructure, we start to have to pay less for data silos. So this is really a compounding effect over time, where the more we use permissionless systems, the more we use open infrastructure or public infrastructure, and the more we use common funding and incentive models based on policies that are incentivizing these changes, the lower the overhead gets, the more openly we can collaborate with each other, and the more we have the ability to generate trust in the products that we're producing as organizations or facilitating for technologies like the IOTA protocol. So transparency can really enable us to quantify progress as well. From the IOTA perspective, we've got some key partners that we're working with, such as Dell Technologies, Intel, ARM, the Linux Foundation. We're implementing this data trust model and this data confidence fabric, which is what we're calling it, based on the innovation that we've seen with Dell. We're open sourcing a lot of these capabilities under the Linux Foundation, and we're scaling them into different verticals. Because the other thing we're seeing with circular economy systems is it's not necessarily vertical specific anymore. It's not just about the supply chain, but it's also about the manufacturing. It's about the different technologies you're using. So there's a lot of different stakeholders that have to come into play, and there's a lot of different revenue cycles that have to be considered. So that's one of the things I'm really advocating for when we're talking about building and scaling circular economic solutions, is understanding who these stakeholders are, where these open technologies come into play, and how we can create public policies to incentivize the acceleration of this innovation so that we can address what circular economies are here to do, which is reduce the impact that we're making on our environment and to have a more sustainable way of collaborating and generating products. So when it comes down to it, taking things like the data that you can transfer and enable through blockchain technologies, particularly in permission and open systems, really helps us address this trust situation. And as we do this and scale this out, trust helps us scale out these circular economy solutions. The last thing I'd like to say too about the blockchain space is we're seeing a lot where organizations in the space are building protocols like businesses. And I think that's a detriment to scaling out these types of situations or these types of solutions. I really think when it comes down to it, we need to remember that a protocol is a protocol. If you look at how the internet was formed, one organization didn't own it, they didn't scale it out as a business. It was built because there was a need for collaboration between organizations and academic institutions and governments. So taking things like TCP/IP, understanding that it's a protocol and that protocols need to scale globally and not necessarily as a business in a small instance, and designing them to scale to 8 billion people or 800 billion devices and products so that we can interact and transfer on a common medium, utilizing standards to standardize what this looks like openly, making sure that the fee structures are either non-existent as public infrastructure or to an absolutely minimal amount so that we can have that efficiency to reduce the overhead costs, and then creating new business models with things like digital assets to involve your customers, give them ownership over your supply chain, over your product development, build relationships with them, and then scale these solutions out in a global format. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And last but not least, I'll give the floor to Tomasz Lewak, who is the founder of Origin Trail. Tomasz, take it away, please.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as it is a habit these days with hybrid events being live and online. We got to use all the time zones and say hi to everyone. I'd like to use these 12 minutes to speak what we see is important around the topic of circular economy, some of the lessons we have been able to learn on this topic, and more importantly, what are some of the directions that we see are necessary for us to be able to tackle this complex challenge of the circular economy. It's been around for quite a bit, the topic of circular economy, and the benefits seem to be pretty clear to whenever you're talking to any of the stakeholders within either the industry or the policymakers or even consumers or individuals. The upside is pretty clear to all of us. But just yesterday, we've had a warm-up event for the session that we're holding later today called Frictionless International Trade. And we were talking about a few things around supply chain challenges that we're facing today with Dan Pertel, who's also here in the audience from British Standard Institution, and Ken McElroy out of the Home Depot. And the certain things that were brought forward were obviously a lot of challenges posed today by just the times of COVID that we have, but also the importance of inclusivity of so many of different stakeholder groups, consumers as well being often put forward in as one of those groups that is required to take part or to be involved in the process if we are truly to make a circular economy work. But the thing is that a lot of times, as we talk about consumers, or especially in this context, it's taken as a stakeholder group outside of the entire process, right? So we're looking at how to convince someone to do something, how to present what's the upside of doing the reusing, doing the recycling. What is the missing piece though in this approach is really rethinking taking it as a supply chain data challenge, but in a way where we need to not look at the stakeholder groups as outside of this process, but rather inside. So it is absolutely necessary for us to include all the different, any stakeholder group that's involved within this supply chain process from the beginning all the way to the consumers as equal partners in this process. And how can we achieve that? Well, the easiest way or the only way that really where we see this happening is that we got to move from just thinking about physical, just thinking about digital, thinking about products, thinking about data to convergence. There's no silver bullet in this thing. So what we need to do is we need to find a way of how can we all tie this thing together, tie the physical products, tie the digital footprint that they create, but also tie the people and organizations that are a part of these processes. We got to move as we converge the physical and digital. We got to move from not only allowing things to be discoverable or things to have verifiability, but they also need to have value. And we need to be able to create a system where this value can be shared amongst those stakeholders. So we're no longer creating narratives of trying to convince someone to do it, but rather create motivations for someone to act in a certain way, create incentivizations for them to, not necessarily by funding a certain action, but rather allowing someone to benefit from making certain action, or allowing them to benefit off of the data that they've created in the process of doing something. Of course, it's in theory, those are the building blocks that we need to happen, where we got to start somewhere. We got to start somewhere that will allow us to build on those value propositions that we see critical to achieve this future. With Origin Trail, we see this to be in a decentralized knowledge graph that allows you to do exactly these things. What our mission is, what our vision is, we're organizing the humanity's most important assets and making them discoverable, making them verifiable, and making them valuable. So when we're talking about assets, it's really digital assets, it's physical assets, it's a very wide category, but it doesn't matter because we need to converge. We need to come to a point where all these things are able to have these properties so that all stakeholder groups can be involved in the process, and then we can only achieve really the vision of a circular economy. Looking at Origin Trail, what we do is we combine two very interesting technologies. And I'll speak about technology because it's important from the perspective of the value proposition that it brings to this discussion. We've heard a lot about blockchain today, things like trust, transparency, very, very important concepts. Again, need to converge and need to transpire across different realms, realm of physical, realm of digital. The blockchain are trust networks, and as that, they act perfect. But by no means they are a silver bullet. It's not something that you just by appending it will solve all the problems or all the challenges that you might see, especially in a topic so complex as the circular economy. So the component that Origin Trail as a decentralized knowledge graph uses to adhere to these challenges next to blockchains is knowledge graphs. So knowledge graphs are technology utilized by world's largest Web 2, if we want to call them, non-blockchain companies like Facebook's, like Uber, Google, obviously, mapping out either their user behavior, either their World Wide Web, or Uber with the drivers and the riders. Everything relies on these very flexible structures that allow you to create things that are in a way quite magical. Because when we look at what the systems require from today's perspective, how can we look at this fragmented Web 2 data silo-C world and connect it together? A knowledge graph structure is really, really highly performant. It can connect things together. It allows you to have interoperability. And with adding the decentralized element to it, you have the integrity of what is being shared as well. Privacy by design, enshrining it from the get-go. So all these things that we see are necessary throughout the over 10 years of work that we've done in the field have been pushed into this open source protocol, into this network that today has over 2,000 nodes globally, and is there to be utilized, is there to be leveraged for anyone building a Web3 application that requires the type of structured semantic data, to a business that is looking to create higher level of transparency in their operations, or in a circular economy challenge when we're talking how can we engage multiple stakeholders that aren't necessarily working together on a day-to-day basis, but have a requirement of a common platform, a common ground, of a middle ground, not owned by anyone on its own, but utilized and be able to leverage by any stakeholder group that can benefit from it. This is the way that we see things can be moved forward. These are the tangible steps that we can do to move from looking at circular economy from a very high-level perspective towards really going in the grounds and making a difference, making an impact. We've been fortunate enough to have a chance to work with British Standard Institution in advancing in multiple different industries. Just an example, Trusted Factory, an audit report sharing platform was implemented for a scan network association, which has all the biggest importers into the US involved. And you have competitors working together, sharing audit report data because they have these value propositions that make it happen. This is only the beginning, obviously. What we can do is extend this work that's been done into multiple other domains. And we already have things like pharmaceuticals. Again, how important is it to involve the final user of the medicine, the final, when we're talking about vaccines or anything else, really is, it needs to be a circular model. Otherwise, especially in things like, let's say, pharma, we are very much in a big problem. Next to this, of course, there's other use cases that I'd be happy to jump in, but I think that I'm being pressured a little bit by time because the topic has gotten me a little bit ignited. So I'll try to stop myself there. I think that we do have a bright future if we look at leveraging these technologies that can make a tangible impact, and we do start making tangible steps today. Not necessarily waiting for the next thing to happen, not necessarily waiting for next policy to come out or for the next funding to be available, but rather looking at how can we leverage things to start making value today, getting our hands dirty, and really, you know, so that we sit here maybe in 3, 5, or 10 years time, hopefully in a more larger live audience, and we're able to look back and say, okay, man, we did some good work in this 3, 5, or 10 years, and we made the world a better place. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope this was informative, and we're always, of course, happy to collaborate on these topics with organizations and individuals that see it beneficial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. And again, thank you very much for all the interesting and insightful speeches today. I think it's a natural and great scene setter for the next discussion. So before we go to the roundtable discussion, I will just announce a very short 1-minute break before we actually set up the stage. So yeah, just bear with us for just a moment. Thank you. We'll address, among others, how blockchain technology can actually contribute to the circular economy, what are actually the challenges that it seeks to address, any potential challenges for further adoption, and how policymakers can further support this growing sector. So I know that many people are joining from all across Europe. So at the end of the discussion, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So I hope we have a very engaging discussion from a variety of perspectives. I also want to, so basically I want to invite everyone to feel free to ask any questions in the chat, in the Zoom chats function, and anyone who is attending in person to just raise their hands, and we'll give you the floor to ask directly the participants and the panelists. So moving on to the discussion right now, I think there's no one better placed than our panel of distinguished speakers today to shed some light on this important topic. We are currently joined by Nathan Williams, who is the founder and CEO of MindSpider. We have Jure Pirc, who is here with us in person. He is the founder and CEO of Cryptography. We have virtually Gérard Guinemont, who is the Group Chief Data Officer at Engie. And last but not least, we have William Neal, who is, if you tuned in for the first session, he gave a great presentation on the circular economy of the various Commission initiatives. He's the advisor at the European Commission's Director General for the Environment. And without further ado, I want to now begin with just an open question to everyone, but I'll maybe start first with Nathan. As already mentioned, one part of the circular economy and making it a success is actually ensuring that products and recycled goods are not made from primary materials. So that's, I guess, the starting point. So if I can ask you, Nathan, could you please share some some key learnings and insights from your initiative, and maybe explain what you're trying to achieve. And also outline how blockchain technology can actually provide a solution to these challenges today. Thank you.
What you're describing is the challenge with recycling is that in a lot of ways it's a black box because companies have never really wanted to know where their material goes after they're done with it, what happens to post-consumer material. And the reason circular economy is a big deal right now is because we've got a pressing need to retrieve some of these materials, to get some more value out of it. But recycling really is a way of dealing with what is effectively an externality, waste, where like no one wants waste, everyone wants to just sell their stuff and be done with it, because after that it's just pure cost. So blockchain can help. How can it help? It can help by accountability, basically. That's the number one thing. Like, it's all about incentives. Everything else that we talk about is window dressing. So the data that we collect, who sees the data, how we can protect against, illicit material being laundered in, that's all secondary to the incentives for people to be held accountable to actually do the recycling. And that comes both from at the design level for designing products to be recycled, from the early stages of the supply chain and managing waste from the production processes. So you're not just looking at post-consumer like e-waste and things, but also mining waste to get other materials out of it and things like that. And where blockchain can come into play is through traceability. So through keeping track of documents and keeping track of data so that you've got a better picture of what's going on. And it's quite a complex picture when you think of how many stages are involved with recycling, and then how to make a business case for implementing this type of traceability at each step. But the most important thing is to keep in mind that the externality problems that we face today in recycling, in climate change, in deforestation, in environmental damage is all down to people in the supply chain saying it's someone else's problem. And that's where the technology can really start to break this down. And also we're doing blockchain traceability. I think I didn't mention that, but you asked.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I think that was very interesting. And I just see that on our screen here that Jérôme Petry from the introductory speeches also joined us, and Marie-Ramon Daré also joined us for the panel discussion. So Jérôme is from the Ministry of Economy of Luxembourg, and Marie is from the Ministry of Ecology of France, who will be joining us today as well. Now, I also want to let Yogur react to also Nathan's point, and also just give an overview of what CryptoWater is doing, and elaborate on how blockchain is addressing inefficiencies in the current system, for example.
Thank you. Yeah, to make a long story short, we're a little startup. So from the day one, I've been trying to innovate beyond fintech in blockchain space. I'm also founder of a few open source blockchains. And of course, these blockchains have been used so far to timestamp water when it's bottled. So this is essentially the basic idea of CryptoWater, so that you have an immutable timestamp recorded on a public blockchain ledger at the time of water bottling. So the water goes into the bottle, we put a transaction on a public address that belongs, a unique public address that belongs to the bottle. So this is the timestamp. Now, to address the circular economy part, with each transaction, of course, the amount of cryptocurrency tokens or coins are transmitted onto this address. So I have a sample bottle here. So in this is going to be like a little social experiment as well. So maybe our camera guy is going to help us out a little bit. So this is the bottle. This is from a local glass company, Krasnik. We only do premium waters, and of course, we only do glass. So this is glass is sustainable. It can be reused, repurposed. So we'll never see crypto water in a plastic bottle, never ever. Okay, so we go down to the basics of blockchain and cryptography. So we have a key pair, and we have a little zoom. Yeah. Let's see if it shows up. So this is the bottle address. And there's a transaction was done a couple of minutes ago, let's say half an hour ago, when the water was put into the bottle. And here is a private key. So for our viewers, the one that's gonna go to cryptowallet.si and set up a wallet, and if he managed to scan this QR code on the live stream, you're gonna claim those cryptocurrencies that were used to try and timestamp. So good luck, happy hunting. So let's go back to the project itself. So now we have a bottle, we have an app. You can use the app to scan the public key, and you get an overview of how many cryptocurrency units are on the bottle, or let's say a bottle vault. And you have a Unix time of when the bottle was, water was bottled. Along with the line, you get cashback. So what the user does is he can either save this water, drink water, save the coins, or drink the water, redeem the coins. So this is up to the end user how to get involved in this circular part of this project. But at the end of the day, when we go back to blockchain itself, so it's all about open ledger that has this permanent record of when the water was bottled. So my personal view to how I see this progress moving forward is to have a maybe unified approach to product labeling that just has a QR code. Because if you buy water today from a store, you have a huge label on it with a massive amount of information. And that information can all be simply stored in a QR code and of course interpreted by a special dedicated application. So yeah, the colleague before me, traceability. So the key element here is traceability. And of course, because it involves a cryptocurrency transaction, it's also a model, circular economy model, when the user of the product, buyer of the product, gets some cash back, let's say in form of a cryptocurrency. In our case, it was used on the Lana Coin network. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogur. I think that was very interesting. And you also mentioned the last part about crypto as a reward, which also is one of the kind of the second pillar of the circular economy, the incentivization of behavior. Could you elaborate a bit more on how actually your project, for example, and how in general blockchain can incentivize people to participate in the circular economy, and what are potential challenges for this that you see currently emerging?
Yeah, so this is like a little gray area at the moment, I think, in terms of regulatory. So because anytime you give a cash incentive or a crypto cash incentive to somebody, if it's, I don't know how it's globally, but in Slovenia, if you have a gift, because this is like a gift, you get a cash reward in terms of how much cash you get back with this bottle, for example. So if it's like 10 euro, it's one story. If you give 100 euro worth of cryptocurrency, that's a whole new ball game. So in terms of how much cashback is actually comes with a bottle, this is actually totally uncharted territory for me. For me personally, to achieve the timestamp, it can be up to 8 decimal places. I mean, the minimal amount required to timestamp is like less than 1,000th of a penny. But in reality, we can also put 1 Bitcoin on a bottle and use that to timestamp. But that's going to be a very, very expensive bottle of water. So in terms of how to see this circular economy model in cashback and incentivize the consumers, so this is a really, really uncharted territory, and I'm looking forward to exploring and researching it even more further. So.
Thank you, Yogur. I would like to now turn to also to Gérard and Marie, maybe, to explain a bit more about how you envision the role of data and blockchain and AI for the circular economy. Because as Marie presented earlier in the introductory speech, there's a lot going on in the Gaiax project. So if you could just elaborate a bit more on how, what is the role of data and blockchain in the mix, and what are some potential challenges that you foresee in this regard? maybe, yeah, starting first with maybe Gerard.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So as Mary said this morning, just earlier, one of the use case, which is a priority use case regarding circular economy, is about how to improve the product recycling measurements. And from the origin of the product, the capacity of recycling, the level of loss, and the environmental also cost of the process, of the recycling process. And it's a bit early today because we, as Mary said, we are just between the think tank, tank and the do tank. So we need to move from think to do. But from my experience in other domains, I really sure that we need absolutely to use the blockchain and the AI technologies. And as everybody already mentioned, especially to track, to measure, and also to maybe to equip some trusted third party between the different stakeholders of the value chain. It can be, for instance, consumer and producers in terms of energy. Right? In my experience within NG, we are also experimenting some circular economy around energy between consumer and producers. So AI is very important on the one hand, because we need to use AI to predict, for instance, to predict energy generation, taking into account the weather forecasts, the weather forecast data. So we need to adopt some models of AI models in order to also to decide what's the better solution. Do we need to store the energy that we have just produced? Do we need to consume this energy? What is the best balance, taking into account the weather forecast and also the fact that it's very difficult to predict the renewable energy production. But it's also very important to adopt blockchain technology in order to create a trusted environment between consumers and producers. And as regards our use cases for Gaiax, I think that we will have also to put those two technologies together. So for me, it's very important to use AI and blockchain technologies as it regards everything around circular economy solutions. So I don't know, Marie, if you want to add some things about our use case.
No, thank you, Gerard. I won't have much to add. I totally agree with what you said. No, I think as we just start, we don't know yet all the issues we will have to face to develop the use case. For example, issues about data. As I said, do we have enough data to develop the use case? Do we have to collect more? Do we have to stimulate the fact of sharing this data? Then we have to face different issues about the interoperability of the different data we have to make work together. So yeah, we won't have much to say about this use case so far, but I agree with you, Gerard, with what you say.
No, thank you, Marie. And on the point of data, I think also very interesting point is, I guess the quality of the data and the link between the physical in the digital world. And I was just wondering, this is maybe an open question to everyone, so feel free to jump in, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how data we can actually ensure that the data in the blockchain is accurate, there's quality in the data. What can we do and how can we solve this issue? So please, anyone, maybe Nathan, I see that.
I'd love to comment on this. This is one of my favorite topics. here's a challenge when we're talking about circularity, traceability, recyclability, all of this. You're talking about data collection and how do you maintain good data? And the problem is that's a very general question for what amounts to about 100 specific problems. Tracking data along a supply chain, whether it's linear or circular, is not a single task. It's not a single problem. You've got maybe hundreds of different actors in the supply chain that will have different data needs that each need to be addressed. And securing the data is on a case-by-case basis. I'll give you an example. So what we do, we track minerals and metals, raw materials. We do it by creating digital product passports, and in the product passports, we've made them fairly flexible, okay? Because for this reason, if you want to track provenance, that's the simplest use case. It's the thing that most people think of. Where does this metal come from? Where does this material come from? You need to be able to do a couple of things. Number one, authenticate that the physical metal that you receive is what's on it corroborates with the data on the blockchain. How can you do that? Well, you can get a lab report. That's the most common. If you've got metal ingots, then you can get a lab report that says the percentage of metal and use it as a fingerprint. If you're more concerned about someone laundering illicit concentrate into the smelter so that it gets melted down and becomes part of that metal, then you need a mine to smelter chain of custody tool. And so then you need to collect data on bags that are sealed and bag weights and who signed off on them. Now, if you're concerned instead about something else, like one of the big ones in the metal supply chain is conflict funding. So are you funding terrorist or armed groups? Then none of that will help. So what you need to do is look at the trucks that are transporting the metal and say, okay, what is their itinerary? When do they leave? When do they arrive? Do the trucks arrive when they're supposed to, or were there unscheduled stops? And all of this provides a better picture. So, but then the question is, whose responsibility is it to authenticate that this metal is from a good source or hasn't had incidents? And what's the best way of approaching this? So you've got sort of a purist-based approach, like we want clean metal in our supply chain. And this is, you know, naturally, a company doesn't want to have the problem of dirty metal or forced labor or slavery or child labor or conflict funding in their supply chain. And so maybe they would buy from areas that are low risk. But there's problems with that because that from a sort of a global or a regulatory standpoint, that just shifts the problem to someone else, because you know, someone like the big electronics producers, Apple, not to single them out, but I mean, they're bigger than the entire minerals industry. If they manage to get 100% clean sourced any metal, then what would everybody else use? Because there's just not enough traced responsible material on the market. So an incident-based approach might be the best way of saying, okay, well, we've identified where this material is coming from. We can raise incidents, and then we can acknowledge and take steps to mitigate them. It's not something that we're the most comfortable with, but then that's a different set of data that we need. If we're looking at child labor, that's a different set of data, right? And so securing the data comes down to a trust exercise, which is weird in blockchain, because in blockchain, you're talking about trying to reduce trust. And I actually now think, you know, 4 years into working as blockchain, that I prefer to think of it as reducing the cost of trust, because you always need to trust someone in this chain, whether it's the person putting the data on the chain or the person signing off on the person putting the data on the chain or the transaction. And you got to think, where are the opportunities or the risks, rather, for this data to be corrupted or for you know, incidents to arise or what have you. And you got to solve for the risks that are biggest, right? As opposed to over developing for solving for risks you don't have. I don't think anybody would think of doing a full bag and tag chain of custody solution for a vertically integrated mine that's based in Germany. Because usually you don't have the risks of armed groups collecting illegal taxes, but you might have that sort of issue if you're in other areas of the world. So knowing the context, knowing the location, And you can just see just how context specific this is, and how at each stage of the supply chain, you need to collect different types of data in order to address the specific compliance needs you have. How that gets reported into a product passport as it goes along the supply chain is another complex issue, because you can easily get information overload if you start giving this information to non-experts. And so this is a discussion that has to be had as well, as to who should see the data, whose responsibility it is to say that this is good enough for compliance purposes or for downstream purposes. And then the whole other side is, how do you tell the story to the non-experts so that they can feel confident in what they're buying, which they should have the right to do.
Right. Thank you, Nathan. I like that you mentioned the responsibility, which I want to get to when I get to William about addressing this issue. But first, I wanted to just give the floor to Yogur, because I think he also has something to say on this topic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I liked what Nathan was speaking about. I also tried my best to maybe burst the bubble with the blockchain a little bit, because like in 2017, everybody was trying to put everything on the blockchain. So the blockchain itself, let's put it into perspective. So we have a public blockchain, we have a private blockchain. So we have two options. This is essentially just a database. What is good about the database is that it can, if it's distributed, it can be stored, this database copy, on a variety of, let's say, computers and servers. So the risk of losing the data is essentially zero. In my case, once the network grows in size, let's say we have 50 or 60 nodes, that means that's like 60 servers running globally, serving this data to the public. So losing the data is like mission impossible in that case. Of course, in case of worst case scenarios, we lose everything, but it just doesn't happen like that on blockchain. So to put everything on the blockchain, it's just not going to happen. So in supply chains are very, very complex mechanisms, and there's always going to be a centralized entity there that's going to have to be a trusted party that's going to be validating, let's say, the protocol of timestamps from the supply chain from point A to point Z. So in the case of raw minerals and raw materials, this is a really complex. So water is simple, for example. Water goes into the bottle, it goes to the end consumer. It doesn't get like bounced around and reused or upgraded. And of course, you don't understand what I'm trying to say, that the blockchain is part of the solution. It's not the universal solution for everything. So use the chain where it's needed, where the data needs to be accurate, verifiable 24/7, and of course, available 24/7. So if I go back to the roots of the blockchain, Satoshi Nakamoto was actually named not blockchain. He say it was time chain. So use the time chain to timestamp the events on your supply chain. And that's it. Everything else should still be done using regular databases. And of course, along the supply chain, you have a variety of systems that have to work together, be interconnected. But those systems can still look up the necessary data and timestamps on the blockchain. That's it.
Thank you, Yogur. Thank you. That was very interesting. And maybe before going to William, I just wanted to also ask Jerome about his initiative, because you presented this circular data initiative just before this roundtable. So we just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think are the issues currently with standardization and interoperability. How do we make sure, how do we actually enable more interoperability via, for example, the initiative that you presented earlier?
Yes, I think the major enabler for that is the standard by itself. So it's very important that the standard explains exactly what we're talking about. So making sure to have clear references to already existing regulations, norms, or other methodologies to control this circular properties and to report the results in a standardized way. That is very important. I think also our efforts are all put towards open standards Therefore, we choose to do this at ISO level. So we didn't want to go into a private standard, and we wanted to be also at ISO to make sure everyone worldwide is on the same boat. We didn't want to have something for just one part of the world. And we have also to acknowledge that products are being made mainly in Southeast Asia, for example, or other countries, but mainly not where they are used. So making also this difference between user markets and producer markets. So therefore, very important to have it on a global base in the same and standard and the same language. So these are, for me, I think that the main important things for enabling interoperability. So you need to have that ontology on product level even before you speak that on a data level or data model.
Thank you, Jerome. And William, turning to you, a lot of issues have been mentioned already in terms of ensuring the actual traceability, data quality, interoperability. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think could be blockchain's role in the circular economy, given the many different initiatives that you outlined just before this roundtable. How do you envision blockchain's role into the circular economy more specifically, and also maybe AI, where does it fit in the mix?
Well, Leuven, thanks. I think we're seeing so many good examples of how this can happen. And I have to say, I was reading a publication, I'm sure most of you have seen it. It was written by our joint research center at the European Commission called Blockchain Now and Tomorrow. And there's one phrase in it which really struck me, where it says, organizations should not develop solutions looking for problems, but should find existing and foreseeable problems and then look for the blockchain solutions. And I think this is what we're seeing today. And just going back to what the gentleman was saying earlier, about really addressing problems, not thinking that blockchain is going to be the solution to everything. But I can link it to a couple of the issues that have just been brought up, because I think it was Nathan was talking about the need for incentives, and I think the problem is that there are split incentives in many value chains. So the people that we're asking to provide data wouldn't necessarily be the ones that would benefit from the provision of that data, because it might provide value to somebody further down the chain or make possible another business model. So I don't know, for example, I've spoken to textile recyclers who tell me that there are certain, most things they can deal with in their recycling processes, but there are certain dyes, for example, which if they're introduced into garments, if it gets into a batch, the batch is ruined, they lose the value of that batch. Now, if they know that it's in there, then that means that their whole process becomes much more feasible and they don't have those risks. And it's so essential that when we're talking about recycling, we work on value, not just quantity. Most of the statistics we see about quantity, but what people are going to use those secondary raw materials want is quality. And if we can ensure that we get out the problematic materials and chemicals and combinations, then we need to be able to incentivize the people putting those products on the market in the first place to take those chemicals out. Otherwise, we get these sort of legacy chemicals which stay in the system. Now, just to give an example of how that might work and how you might build in that responsibility, I'm just thinking of bottles, and we're talking about glass bottles. But if we were to take our packaging and packaging waste directive, in there we have an obligation for all packaging to be in a producer responsibility system, so extended producer responsibility. So there is a producer responsibility organization which deals with the packaging, and we have the obligation in there for eco-modulation. So that means that, for example, the producer responsibility organization in France is called CTO. They tell me that if they get a plastic bottle with red dye in it, that is extremely, for some reason, I don't know why, difficult to recycle. It's a lot more expensive and problematical in the batch. Eco-modulation would mean that the producer of that bottle will be charged more. But of course, for that, you have to go back to the beginning. So you have to have a system which can identify those bottles and then charge it back and at an increased rate. And again, we may be talking about, you know, fractions of centimes. But if we can internalize those externalities using blockchain along the system through sort of machine readable tagging and automatic charging, then it makes it work. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult to do that in a manual system. Another point that I wanted to pick up on was what Thomas was saying about consumers and bringing them into the picture. And I have to say that the first reaction of the European Consumers Association, Gaiax, to our suggestion of a digital product passport was to produce a brochure with the title, "Why Moving Essential Product Information Online is a No-Go." And their immediate reaction was to say, we have to have a physical label with all the information, otherwise there are many consumers that are not digitally enabled and or literate, and they wouldn't have access to that information. So we have quite a job to do, I think, in convincing people that this isn't just about, you know, we're not going to try and get rid of the basic information which is already there by legislation. We're just trying to make a whole new realm of data available, which is useful for those circular reasons. And then to come back to your question, which I think we talked about information overload, and I think it's very important in what we're doing with the digital product passport that we are just starting from the perspective of circularity and sustainability. And I have a lot of colleagues from other parts of the Commission looking over our shoulders because they're interested and they think that, yeah, this is a very good pilot, and they could use the unique identifier also for maybe customs purposes or due diligence on, I don't know, on trafficking or on sourcing of materials and so on. For the moment, we're trying to restrict it to that. And key to that is working very much bottom up in terms of identifying the data that should be made available. And that'll be very different for textiles compared to electronics and so on. So we have to set in place a whole process which is just identifying the most crucial bits of data that we need to improve circularity. I think a lot will happen in a voluntary way as well, because once you've got the identifier there, you can make all kinds of data available. But we need to legislate for the most important kinds of data. And of course, as Jérôme was saying, we need the standards, we need the ontologies. We're looking at things like GS1, who've been doing the ontology for barcoding for decades, those kinds of systems to establish that. But when it comes to the individual product groups, we need a process where we get the stakeholders around a table, and we need the recyclers to tell us what is the chemical which makes it impossible for, you know, which ruins your batch, and then we can make sure that there's an obligation to provide that data. So it's really not going at it in a, you know, in terms of making masses of data available, but really trying to focus on the most important to establish circularity.
Very much, William. Anyone want to react to that? I think I saw Nathan raise a hand.
I'd love to. Honestly, it's such a good point. When you think about the incentives, which is really the key part of for companies to join these systems, if you get them right, then you can get a lot of voluntary participation. What we've seen, just a little bit of our backstory. We got started in 2017, and we were trying to get a consortium together to trace tin and then trace lead, and we conducted that with some big players. But what we saw is that we often speak from the point of view of the downstream or of the regulator, and where do my metals come from? How can we get a better overview of the supply chain responsibility? And we were seeing willing participation, but resistance from the upstream because it was just pure cost to them. And so we said, well, how can we overcome that? How can we show ROI at each stage of the game? And that's an ongoing battle, to be honest. We started talking about distinguishing your products, or decommoditizing, or finding new markets, or easier access to the markets, or better relationships with the customers, starting to track things like if you've got a link that you supply the provenance, you supply these data, how many people download the data, how many people click on it, get different layers of information. So you've got public information, and then how many people click through to a website after that, things like that, to demonstrate some sort of ROI for them. Part of traceability might just come down to a moving of markets online. Which is smoother anyway. And so if you've got sort of a minimum requirement to access, materials exchanges, or European import portals, or things like that, then you can sort of tie in traceability with the access to the market that maybe your competitors don't have as of today. And these are the things that we've been exploring. One thing that we started with was the idea of using a cryptocurrency, and there are a lot of really good places where cryptocurrency can work, and old industry incentives is not one of them. Because, I mean, at least it wasn't in 2017. But the idea, like what we tested this, but if you've got an $80 billion chemical company or an $80 billion metals company, they tend not to be super incentivized by getting 10,000 euros worth of crypto. They'll do it as long as it's interesting, but their real interest is in protecting their ongoing business, or having access to markets, or being part of a responsible supply chain, or decommoditizing, or marketing their products, or reducing their costs. And this is one of the key takeaways for this. But if you start to see, okay, well, all of those incentives are sort of individual and tailored to a company, then you start to see just how big an issue this is. So right now, we're still at the level of Craigslist, okay, to use a metaphor. Craigslist, as you may, if probably everyone's used, is just a big classified ad section. But then billion-dollar businesses have been built with one line of Craigslist. So, you get Uber, which is the car sharing, or you get the buying and selling of unique items, and or then you get Tinder being sort of like the classified personal section of each line of Craigslist can be its own billion-dollar business that is specialized to the purpose. In the same way, when you've got sort of a generalized traceability project out there, that's the level of Craigslist. We're trying to capture as much data as we can, but the textiles division recyclers need an app that just gives them a really simple alert. Is there this dye in their thing? And that's one use case. And then, but that's maybe not even textiles. That's maybe cotton recyclers. Maybe that's even a certain type of breed of cotton from certain types of shirts that uses this. And what we're going to see is the solutions need to get more and more and more specialized in order to actually meet the needs of the market. Where I see this going is that the use cases have to be separated from the protocol layer. Okay, so like we developed our own protocol because it was the thing to do in 2017. I don't think many people are developing their own protocols anymore. And I think that as we go forward, fewer and fewer will develop a specialized protocol, because the protocol needs to be simple. Everyone talks about interoperability. And, Jerome, you said it best, like the start of interoperability is what people really want is to share data between each other. Interoperability, the protocol layer, is exceptionally complicated, especially when you start to integrate use case into the protocol. If you've got a protocol designed for trading NFT digital twins of raw materials or water, imagine trying to make a water that is its own crypto running on its own blockchain interoperable with something that is meant for tracking carbon emissions. You could take data off one, put it on another, but to make the blockchains themselves interoperable is really complicated for very low return. And so the future is probably actually sort of like Thomas from Origin Trail said earlier, is sort of an internet-based approach where you've got, you know, a couple of large-scale protocols that are very simple for wider use cases that no one has a complete monopoly on. Maybe there are businesses that make, you know, money with it, but it's more like an infrastructure or like a utility. And then you've got different businesses that have been built on top of it to meet the business needs, and that's what's going to allow these connections to happen. But it's incredibly complicated, needs a lot of vision, a lot of high-level direction, and to be honest, it needs a lot of funding. And the funding for such a thing is going to be very difficult to get out of the private sector for the near future, unless it goes into, you know, very specific large-scale use cases that can show an early ROI. I think that this is a role that government can really step up and play in the development of these core protocols and the base technology for this.
Thank you, Nathan. Actually, I think I want to expand on this point, the last point that you mentioned about funding, and take this up with Gerard, because I think you have a good perspective coming from the Gaiax project. So I was wondering if you could tell us what you think about how we can actually take a project from basically proof of concept to actual production. What are the challenges, and what role do you see for public-private partnerships, also taking into account what Nathan mentioned last?
Yeah, I think it's really a key issue to transform all the POCs that we can elaborate, that we can put in place and set up around Europe, and to scale up and to put that POC at scale. So for me, there are two different components. The first one is the technology. Definitively, I think that if we are not able to provide all those POC with industrial technology, taking into account also the sovereignty that is absolutely necessary in order to trust the different at-scale systems. So the technology is key. And the second one is the funding, because I fully agree that this is also the question that we have today around Gaiax project. Is of course at the end of the think tank period. So we had a lot of innovation discussions with the different partners, but at that stage we are able to develop some POC at very low scale, but it's difficult to grow that POC because there is a lack of funding. And I fully agree that the private sector is not able today to fund everything, but which is needed to put the POC at scale. So everybody is more or less, and this is the case of the Gaiax data space, this is my own experience, everybody is working on the best efforts approach, putting in place all these own means in order to provide what it is needed in terms of innovation, technologies, data. But if you want to transform those different POC, once again, it's very important to combine the efforts between the private and public sectors in order to find the funding which is needed. So technology on the one hand, common technology, trusted technology, sovereign technologies, and funding.
John, that's a very good point. And I saw Yogur here also was nodding, and I think he wanted to also chip in on this.
Yeah, I would like to put in my 2 cents about 3 topics. So the first one is funding. The second one is blockchain interoperability. And the third one, we will get to it. Okay, interoperability within blockchains, it's not really necessary because in supply chain systems, we already had the discussion. There's always going to be a trusted third party with a special application, centralized database and stuff like that. So in terms of blockchain is an open database. We have in the backend application programming interfaces that can give you information from the blockchain that you want, desire, or filter it out the unnecessary information. So this is just communicating with the blockchain. So if you have a centralized system for supply chain, you just talk to the blockchain A, blockchain B, you get data from both blockchains that you need, you verify that it's accurate, and you move on. Okay, so it sounds simple, but at the end of the day, now we go back to, now I start to the point where funding. So let's not pretend money is gonna solve all our problems. You can have $1 billion if you don't have skillful developers that's going to program the solutions we need for the future in circular economy, in blockchain world. It's not really matter how much funding we get. So if we get funding, we need to invest it first into knowledge, into teaching people so they can build the future we want. Because right now, as an IT guy, I see a massive shortage of talent in terms of general IT stuff, not to even mention cybersecurity and blockchain experts. You can count blockchain experts, put it into one cinema space from entire globe. So we need a major cinema packed with those kind of people. So let's invest money that we get first into educating, and this is where the government should step in and consider having specialized universities implementing at more advanced levels of IT knowledge, trainings, skillful. So it's IT industry in digital world should be the same as teaching English language or mathematics. So we need to put money into educating young talents. Otherwise, the private sector is going to snatch them all away, and we will be back to the drawing board. We're going to have no people that can develop solutions that are needed in the digital age. The colleague was nodding before I saw when I said it's quite simple to interoperate the blockchains. It's not really, but if proper developers write proper application programming interfaces, I was talking about communicating with blockchains, not interoperability itself, because it's a public database. If you need data, you just call the node and it will give you the information. So part of the regarding the funding and of course how this interconnected world with hundreds of different blockchains using different protocols, it's going to be a challenge, but this is up for the technical community to solve. There is no bureaucrat in any government is going to solve that problem. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You're a very good point also about education, which is something I want to touch upon later on. But I just wanted to ask if anyone wants to react to yours mention of interoperability. Maybe Jerome.
I would respectfully challenge the idea that this is that number one, that a third party is always going to be present, first of all. With supply chain traceability, there's no, like, if a third party was always going to be present, then theoretically, you could just do it with a regular database. Why do we need the blockchain anyway? We can just store some hashes of a regular database, we're done. And I think that there is a benefit to designing systems where the individual company or the entity is in charge of the data that they submit, as opposed to having sort of a third party be present to authenticate everything. Because and my reason for this is the following: like if you're concerned about, you know, collecting chain of custody. Okay, let's do a very simple use case: chain of custody of metals that come from a mine to a smelter in Africa. All right, this is something that we do, and there right now the main way of doing it for OECD compliance, most people use a third party that goes, they check, there's a bag, they weigh it, and someone else signs off. To be OECD compliant, you don't actually need to do that. And having the third party increases the cost a lot. And who pays the price is the miners. And the data that they collect is not necessarily better than having the data submitted by the people themselves and then signed off by the buying party. So you can, and trust me, we've been working with the ICGLR on this and with members of the OECD and the Responsible Minerals Initiative to find ways and to provide a tool for this chain of custody that doesn't involve a third party and wouldn't necessarily even involve us. That it would be a tool that would be able to provide this chain of custody that would be between a company and like a producer and its customer. And this sort of thing, when you're thinking working at scale and global supply chains and just how big the world is, I think that this is actually going to be necessary, because when you're starting to get from just supply chain authentication into the more general case of trying to just transfer data from player to player in the supply chain and to adapt that to different use cases, you won't always have that third party. So, and you can take data off of the public area of the blockchain, and you can make it interoperable if you have sort of a pattern for use. But again, the question is what problem you're trying to solve. If the problem is the transaction, right? If the problem is that you want to verify the transaction actually happens, or that data is secured from there, then it's very difficult to get it off of one blockchain onto another in a way that is responsible, because like, for example, even with our blockchain, we have an API. I don't see my customer's data. It's encrypted with their public key, and so unless they specifically share it, or unless we build an application where they're required to share it, it would be very difficult for me to see my customer's data and then authenticate it in the other blockchain. And so there could be two conflicting records that exist that only the customers would be able to see. And then the question is, do the customers have the knowledge of that? It's not insurmountable, but if you solve it, then you end up reducing the data security and the data privacy that might make people use it in the first place. So this is the challenge, I think, in interoperability. I'm all for it. We've done some interoperability tests. We even have an API, but I would just challenge that the third parties are always there and that it's a simple use case.
Thank you, Nathan. And on the point of interoperability, I also wanted to hear what Jerome thinks about this, coming from the perspective of his projects standardizing, bringing standardization of data and traceability.
Yeah, I want maybe just before that reflect on Nathan, what he just said. So I have the feeling there are two levels here of third party. I guess you have the trusted third party who is making sure that the blockchain is working. And I think in other perspectives, or what also I was showing, you have an accredited auditor which acts as a third party, which will then validate part of the information being made available. So there are probably different levels of third party, which could be a little bit mixing up. Yeah, in terms of interoperability, I also agree with what Nathan said. It needs to be kept really to a basic level. It should not be too complex. Otherwise, whatever you want to do in terms of exchange or handling the data, you will, yeah, it will just get too complex too quickly, because as everyone is looking for a scalable solution, and there was also the speech before that, I like the idea of an internet-like solution. You need to connect billions of users, but also billions and billions of products. So it's probably not an easy part to do, but I guess you need to focus on very basic information and really keep it to what is necessary, and also only exchange the information on a need-to-know base with whom is requesting that specific information. So no need to store all information everywhere and duplicate it. So that will be a complex challenge to maybe define how that governance should work and enable this.
Thank you, Jerome, and that actually leads me to a good segue that I want to ask William about. So, when you see, when you hear about all these challenges, how do you think these could be addressed at the EU level, more specifically from a policy perspective? I mean, do you see the need for regulatory approach or for a more softer approach like guidance or some codes of conduct maybe, or it's just down to education and public-private partnerships? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. I mean, the reason that I was in my presentation at the beginning explaining the importance of using single market legislation was really to say that we have the power, if you like, as regulators to allow or not allow certain things on the European market. Now, I personally think that by having a passport and an identifier on products, the vast amount of positive effect will be done through voluntary information provision, and all kinds of things will happen on their own without us getting involved. But because we are acting in the public interest, including environmental protection and sustainability, we can insist on certain things. So, for example, obviously on certain parameters for the identifier, but also on certain types of information being made available. I'll give an example, which is a bit of a pilot for us. I mean, the digital product passport will be a more horizontal instrument, as I explained through the Eco Design Directive, but we've already done it in the batteries regulation, which was adopted at the end of last year. So this is looking at, well, we're trying to sort of regulate the market for the future of electric vehicle and industrial batteries. And obviously, electric vehicle batteries have a long life. It'd be very useful to have both static and dynamic information, so that, I don't know, for example, when an electric vehicle battery is no longer performing well enough to be viable for mobility, that it's used for energy storage. And at that point, we need to know when is the optimum point in terms of its efficiency to make that change. And we need to make the market for that work as well. And we need to be able to record the transaction, have a market value for that. So there are many reasons why we might want static and dynamic data on an electric vehicle battery. And the Global Batteries Alliance, which was set up by the World Economic Forum, is already doing that. They've brought in BMW, BASF, NGOs, Circularize, all kinds of NGOs. They've brought in various stakeholders to work on how that should happen. But of course, we said several times in the course of this morning that things have to be open, non-proprietary, and so on. And there won't just be win-wins. There will be some win-loses. There'll be some difficult things where there's need for arbitration. There'll be certain kinds of data that certain actors won't want to divulge and make available. So in the batteries regulation, we've included an obligation to put the identifier on the electric vehicle battery, and then we've established 3 categories of data which have to be made available. One is B2C, which is rather open, business to consumer information, which is open by default. The second is B2B, which can be encrypted, can be not open, and then B2G, so things that regulators might need to know, which will only be accessible to those regulators. Now, what we're planning to do with the digital product passport is actually have this sort of first level legislatory framework in the Eco Design Directive, establishing certain requirements, but really what we're putting in place is a process. So we might say for textiles or for cotton, we get everybody around the table, and then we do what we call a delegated act. So it's like a second level piece of legislation, which for that particular product group will say what has to be provided. So it might be that particular die that I was talking about earlier that the recyclers say, oh, we really need that information. So in that legislation, we would be able to insist that the producers make that data available. And so this is where we have the regulatory power to do that. Now, we still face some of the other problems which have been mentioned today about validating that kind of data. Now, we have, through our single market legislation, we have market surveillance authorities in the member states, but they are rather overworked or understaffed, whichever way you want to put it. So we have to work out whether that is going to be an effective way for controlling whether a product, that they get, that whether they can actually check that the data is available. I would be interested to know more from other people here who know more about the digital possibilities, whether we can use some kind of crawling technologies to find out whether a lot of the data is being made available, which is the first step. And then if there's some other way that we can actually check the validity and the accuracy of the data which is made available. And I think Nathan was making a lot of interesting points, I think from experience about, that die, we might have to be asking a cotton producer in Bangladesh to make data available. So how are we going to incentivize that? How are we going to make them aware that they have to make that data available? Because they're several steps down the line, and the responsibility in the end, most of the responsibility would be in the hands of the person putting the final product on the market, so the OEM, as it were. So there are quite a lot of issues still to be delved into, but I hope I've answered your question about what is the role of the regulators. I think it's convening, and it's also making certain things enforceable by law, and also doing some of the arbitration, so that where there is data that one person might not have an interest in providing or might be against providing because it's commercially sensitive or whatever, that we find a solution to that, either by forcing them to make it available or by allowing them to encrypt it or for a certain period of time, or just to make it available to certain other actors. So most of this, I think, will be dealt with in this sort of second level process, but we can enforce that legally as well through these delegated acts. And our idea is to do that product group by product group, because textiles is very different from from most other product groups. So we're talking about very varied different product groups with different data requirements.
And on the challenges of B2B data sharing, and as you mentioned, there's an issue also, as mentioned as Nathan, the issue of generating incentives for the different players. Do you think this is, and this is a follow-up question to exactly what you mentioned, do you think this is something that can be actually addressed by upcoming data regulation by the Commission, such as the Data Acts, which should be addressing B2B data sharing? Is this something that can be actually addressed by this piece of legislation?
Absolutely, and we're very interested in the approach of the Data Act, and I think generally the approach that we're seeing coming out of really the top level in the Commission, President von der Leyen in her speeches and so on, is really that the European approach to data sharing is absolutely in line with what we're trying to do here. It's really not surveillance-based, it's not laissez-faire, it's really on the right track. So yeah, we're very much involved in the Data Act through our internal consultations, and so far I see that it's very much in line with what we're trying to do.
Maybe is anyone keen to react to that? Any thoughts from anyone?
Like always, I have my 2 cents. I was listening to this conversation a lot. I'm not a legal guy or a regulator or something like that. So it was mentioned, there was encryption was mentioned a few times. So let's say, okay, so we don't want, in some cases, the data to be open because of commercial secrets and stuff like that. So, but you encrypt the data. So the person who encrypts the data has the decryption key. So how you effectively delegate these decryption keys to the right people, and not, of course, lose access, let's say, or to restrict that the decryption is done by the right people and it is not leaked, because everything you encrypt with a specific password, so to speak, it's just a password, So how do you effectively, securely share the password with the right people? And those people might not be the same people in 4 years' time, and the office changes. So these are also the effective challenges of encrypting data. So because once you encrypt the data, let's say military style encryption, if you lose the key, you lose access to the data itself. So encryption is one part of the solution, but it generates a whole lot of IT security password delegation problems, so if I may call them like that. So maybe we go back then to education. So we need staff, skillful people that will take care of this world of keys and key ownership and key delegation systems. So, thank you.
Thank you, Yogur. And you mentioned also the point of education that I said I wanted to touch upon. And this is an open question to everyone. How do you think we can bridge the gap between people who are not aware of what blockchain can do, and blockchain and AI, for that matter, for the circular economy? What can we actually do to bring more awareness and ensure the uptake of blockchain technology? Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, this is kind of my area. Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, blockchain adoption. It's quite simple. It's all marketing. What we see now today, that projects that are innovating and have lack of marketing, they're totally unaware. Just look, for example, my water project. I'm speaking today to prestige guests, prestige audience about this prototype innovative approach we use in blockchain for supply chain. I mean, for traceability of the product. And on the other hand, I don't have any marketing whatsoever. There is no media covering this project of mine, this startup of mine. But on the other hand, we have in blockchain space a lot of projects that are like complete fogware, but they have a lot of money for marketing. So they are like super hot, but they are still vaporware projects with no physical substance, no industry backing them, and everybody just looking into the monetary side of this blockchain tokens and stuff like that. So in terms of adoption, all comes down to marketing. If the proper marketing is done, blockchain technology will penetrate to every corner of the world, and it will find these use cases where it's applicable, of course. Like I always say, just don't put everything on the blockchain. Not everything belongs there. So in terms of marketing itself, getting awareness out, I think it's a continuous effort by each and every participant in this blockchain world, in blockchain space, to do their best to spread awareness, to find use cases when they are needed, and sooner or later, the entire planet. I think today we are out of this experimental phase that if you mention the word blockchain or cryptocurrency or crypto keys, nobody just like goes, what is that? Everybody knows about Bitcoin today. Everybody knows it's the blockchain technology is behind it. So we just need to keep doing what we are doing. And of course, the awareness will come on itself. But like mentioned multiple times, skillful people, skillful individuals that will scale these blockchain solutions to the needs of, as mentioned, to the billions of products, items, people, it's going to be a challenging. There's no single blockchain on the planet right now that has the capacity or scalability to address this kind of transaction or these many timestamps, as I call them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yogur. Anyone? Any comments?
Yeah, I'd say that when you're talking about traceability, enterprise applications of blockchain, B2B blockchain, you have a couple of factors that affected adoption. Number one is ROI. People might be willing to spend a small amount of money to do a proof of concept or an idea, but unless you're busy building a use case with the customer, it won't progress beyond that. And a lot of the challenge, especially in traceability, is who pays for it, but who benefits from it, and being able to build up a business case where you can say, okay, well, this is what it costs, but this is the benefit, and this is the return, and this is the efficiency, or this is the new markets that you can access. It's 100% critical. Like if I could go and say, look, you can't access European markets unless you had the European product passport, then I guarantee you there would be a lot more adoption there than there is today. Number two thing is ease of use. No one wants to change what they're doing. No one. if they can spend a small amount of money and just add a sticker to what they do and just have an intern take care of it, then they will probably adopt it much more readily than if they have to go through a whole SAP type integration. That's just what it is, and that means that we as service providers have to be comfortable with having imperfect data gathering, because it has to rely on the methods that are already out there for the most part. The exception to that is with new installations, new production facilities that are being built from scratch that integrate this at the design level. They might be a bit more flexible, and that's what we've seen, is that they are a little bit more flexible to adopt this because they don't have to change processes, they're designing it. This is true for, by the way, every product that we're talking about recycling and anything in the circular economy, is that it's much easier to design from scratch something that is meant to be recycled with a new company that has never operated before than it is to take an old school company that is just build the car, build the phone, build the battery, build the computer, sell it, and then it's someone else's problem to recycle, you know, because they haven't had to deal with that. And there is right now it's a niche business model to build for circularity or to build for traceability. And unfortunately, it will be a long process for new companies to come up, gain dominance, old companies to then be forced to change their ways, that sort of thing. It can be helped along by policy, it can be helped along by regulators, but until then, we need to have a ease of use way of access getting people to use this. And then the third thing, I 100% agree, marketing. People need to hear about it. And probably the biggest mistake I've made as a founder is to try and build a really robust product before going out and doing a giant token sale and raising millions of dollars and then retiring in some tropical island without having built anything. But those days are long gone. And as a result, I'm stuck with a nice product, but that's fine. No, but seriously though, it's a harder road to build good software, but it's worthwhile. And I think that the marketing phase and getting it known and getting it popular is critical to this. No one that I've talked to in the B2B industry has slowed down about their interest in blockchain, not a single one. The crypto markets go up and down. The interest in blockchain among the public goes up and down, but among supply chain participants and enterprise users, they know it's the future. They know everything needs to be traceable. It's a matter of how do they get started? How can they justify it to their boss? Who starts it and when? And making people aware that this is the future, that there is a different way of doing business, and that the pioneers who go first actually will be able to capture a bigger market share, I think is going to be really critical to that.
Yeah, well said, Nathan. And on the ease of use points, which also leads me to also going back to AI and what it can also bring for consumers, the automation aspect. And on this point, I also wanted to ask Gerard, because you also mentioned the potential of converging blockchain and AI and the clear benefits of doing this. But I was wondering if you can think of any challenges that you foresee when throwing AI into the mix. Is there anything that needs to be considered when doing that? Are there any specific challenges that arise in this regard?
I think that as it regards awareness regarding the previous question and your question now, I think it's less a question of technology awareness than a question of the value which is behind the use cases. It's for me, it's true for the B2B sector or the B2C as well. So I have two examples in mind coming from my experience. So in the B2B sector, for instance, today we are trying to create a full combination of different partners all along the value chain, the renewable value chain, in order to mitigate the intermittency of the renewable means. So starting from the companies which provide the spare parts for building the wind farms, and going to the companies which are operating and maintaining the wind farms. So we need technologies. Of course, we need AI, we need blockchain in order, we need also master data management, all that stuff that we mentioned earlier. But if we are not able to identify what is the value for each partner, first of all, so the value of the use case for each partner, this is key for me. And of course, the combination of AI in that kind of example, the combination of AI in order to predict the use of the wind farms, to predict the electricity which can be provided by the solar panels or the wind farms, taking into account the weather forecast and using the data and using some very concrete model of AI in order to predict for the next 5 minutes what will be the electricity generated by for instance, the solar panels or the wind farm. It's very important, but nobody cares about the technology, in my opinion. So they are more interested in having the value and what is the benefit, what are the benefits of each partner along this chain. And afterwards, I would say that the technical partners will play their role by combining the two. So for me, they are absolutely necessary to combine the two, but we need to be more focused on the value and the use case and the benefits for each actors. And it's also true for the B2C. For instance, we are building energy communities in some island in France. So what are the benefits? How do we motivate people to be involved in that energy communities? First of all, 1/3 of the French population is interested in producing its own energy. And we need to identify what are the incentives. In that case, the CO2 emission, the economy in terms of energy consumption, these are the two incentives. And so once we are able to convince people that regarding CO2 emission on the one hand and real economy savings of euros is very important for them, they don't care about the technology and they trust the technology.
That's a very good point about what the actual consumers and businesses actually get, regardless of the technology. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Otherwise,
I maybe just want to add two things here, because we are addressing the topic of AI. So like Gerard, I think AI will be very important when we get a lot of data to help for the consumer to make the best choices. And I think that's also where we are going into this kind of digital product passports. It will be a collection of a lot of data, and for the consumer, it will be afterwards very difficult to make the right choices with so many data. It will be either overwhelmed with data or maybe not even taking care of understanding it. So we'll probably need someone, and it can be a machine using AI algorithm to aggregate that information and to spit out the valuable information for the consumer. And that could be also adjusted based on the profile of the consumer. And that's a part where I see AI on the consumer side, but I also see influence of AI maybe for enabling better design of the product. So that's also all this data flowing into these digital product passports are necessary to improve the design of the products, and that from the very bottom of the supply chain. It's very important to make them fit for any kind of new business models. And we are talking specifically about circular economy, but it should not be limited to that. I think we can also think of reducing carbon footprint. We can think of energy efficiency whatsoever. So all these data need to be treated and find an added value. And I believe that AI will be a key enabler on that part.
Thank you for the opinion there, Jerome. So I would just like to remind for people watching virtually to just, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat and we take them up with the panelists. But in the meanwhile, maybe if I can just go around everyone and ask if you had to share a wish list of what you would like to see from, let's say, EU policymakers in the next couple of years, what would be on top of your wish lists? Yogur.
I'm kind of guessing this was like a personal type of question in terms of own businesses. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
I would like to see a possibility of having, since my project Cryptography is like it's token based, so it's like a startup crowdfunding, except I do it different than 2017 projects. They raise money, then they build nothing. We built everything, but we are still crowdfunding. So we have a token. I would like to transform one day in the really near future into a fully digital share, if it's possible. So if it's going to be done next year, it is going to be fine. So this will be my personal wish, to have a fully digital stock where dividends can be paid out to early backers. So hopefully, maybe we will pioneer this in Slovenia next year. Wish us luck.
Thank you, Joran. Maybe Nathan.
I think that would be cool. I like what he said. I think that's obviously it's a hard one, but there's so much potential in fully digital shares. From my perspective, I think that it would be helpful to have sort of a well, basically what's being worked on, like a sort of a standard set of data that would be required as a digital passport, especially recognition from border agencies from European member states for what would make it more efficient to cross a border for these materials, as well as a certain list of requirements. It would make it a lot easier to sort of separate out what is, the companies that are forging ahead as pioneers versus ones that are sort of lagging behind, and rather than relying on enforcement, provide a sort of a venue or a way of giving positive incentive to these companies that are providing this data voluntarily. And the second thing is something I've talked about in other forums before, which is usually I find regulators take a wait and see approach to blockchain startups. Everyone wants to see, okay, who's going to be the winner? Let's let the market decide, and then let's go in and we'll support the one that's the winner. I think that's a mistake. I think we wouldn't have the internet today if that happened in the early days, because if we want a little trip down memory lane, in the 90s, no one thought the internet was going to win. People thought about the information superhighway. They thought Microsoft would come out with their protocol, NetBIOS or Oracle's or AppleTalk or whatever, and that the internet was too slow and clunky to be used by anyone other than researchers, especially not for enterprise-grade applications. And I think that we're in a very different world now, where the market forces are stronger around digital applications, and that it would be very difficult for something like the internet to form today. But that's exactly what we need with something like in the blockchain space. And in order to do that, having regulators take an active role, and maybe it's not about picking a winner, but maybe it's about more creating a regulatory sandbox where crypto startups can go test with official partnership and support of the European Commission if they meet certain requirements, in order to test out different different blockchain applications. And that way there might be a bit more support for a decentralized model, as opposed to ones where that have to be incentivized by the ability to win venture funding or to win large scale adoption and profit, because the protocols really do need to be separated out from the profit making use case, I think. And that's a role that the regulators can play.
Great takeaway for regulators to be more proactive. Maybe I'll give the floor to Gerard, if you can shed some light on this, on what your wish list is.
Pragmatism, I think, is for me something which is very key, because coming from a large company, I struggle a lot internally with a lack of pragmatism. And unfortunately, I think that this is also something which is we have this lack of pragmatism as well. And my wish should be to I would say I think that we need the support of European organizations in terms of regulation, in terms of funding, as I mentioned, in terms of trying to gather the different, in a very simple way, different actors, different partners coming from the startups, the large group, and also the public sectors. But I noticed that it's so difficult to have this way of working. It takes a lot of time, and I have no answer to my question. So otherwise, it would be it's too simple. But my wish is really to find a way to speed up the collaboration, and also to provide a good level. What is just what it is needed in terms of regulation.
This is actually leads me to what Jerome and William were talking about, that there needs to be more communication and connection between regulators and the industry. You would like to, so what would you say, in your opinion, is your wish list from the industry to tackle these issues? Maybe first starting from Jerome and then William.
Coming from the industry, that's a tough question. I think, yes, of course, when we come up with ideas, we would like the industry to have already a perfect solution available. But when listening to all these talks we had before, it's definitely not easy. And yes, we might have very bright ideas, but then how to set this or transform this into a technical solution is not so easy. So I would agree with the one comment that education is of prime necessity to have top-notch developers also here in Europe, to enable all these new technologies to provide the public sector with new possibilities and new solutions.
Key. What about you, William? What do you think about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was expecting more people to say that they'd like more money from the regulators, and there is money there. I mean, in the Environment Directorate General, like in most environment ministries, we have very little money. We have quite a lot of regulatory power, but very little money. But the European Commission in general does have money. We're investing, I mean, particularly, I mean, DG Connect colleagues will be, I'm sure, listening in and involved in the whole event, and can provide more information on this. But the Digital Europe programme is, for example, looking at a call for the end of this year with 22 million euros directed at data spaces for manufacturing pilots, which is really focusing on B2B sharing of information and the development of new business models. We're also going to pilot the digital product passport in 3 areas with 2 million euros. But I think that, and I think the Digital Europe programme and the Horizon programme will have a lot more interesting funding. And we are also trying to build in the sort of regulatory, what did you call it, Nathan? Regulatory sandbox, sandpit concepts. And I think the big money really is if you look at the recovery and stimulus packages which are happening now around Europe. The European Recovery and Resilience Programme is putting out many hundreds of millions of euros for member states to pay out, and with ring-fenced amounts for green and for digital. There aren't that many areas where the two have been linked in the member states' recovery plans, but it's not too late. I mean, these will be delivered over the next few years. And I think that if we can get across to the member states the importance of investing for the future, sort of want to bounce back better, to invest in those areas which link digital and green, and particularly, like you said, on the digital skills. We have our own vocational skills programs, which are also looking very much at developing digital skills. But I think it's very important that at the national level that happens as well. But when it comes to your question and what we would ask of the private sector and the other actors, I mean, the feedback we've got, we're doing our impact assessments at the moment. We're going through our regulatory scrutiny board. We have a sort of better regulation process. We have to really put, when we propose legislation, it has to be built on a lot of consultation. We've had workshops with business, and they've always said, this is great. Yeah, we can really see the value in it. We would not have problems providing the data. We don't think the costs are high, but the benefits are big. And so there's been a lot of enthusiasm, and people have realized the interest in what we're doing. But of course, the devil is always in the detail. And I can see that as we go along, we'll get to where the win-wins turn into those sort of areas where it's going to be more difficult, and we will have lobbying and pressure to go one way or the other. And I think that what I would like to see in the future is a continued commitment to open and non-proprietary approaches, and an openness to providing data which is in the public and the environmental interest, even if there's very little interest of the individual company. And if we can have that as a basis of understanding, I think we can go a long way.
Thank you. With that being said, we unfortunately run out of time, so we cannot address any more questions. But I would like to close the discussion today, and I want to say a big thank you to our panelists. I think it was a great discussion, and I hope it was useful for our attendees. And I also want to thank our attendees for being here. And now I'll say goodbye and wish you all a great day. Thank you so much.